the opening, he defeated Kramnik in the rapid section by employing this line, which you don't see every day. But he likes to remain unpredictable and also to throw guys out of their favorite lines. Let's see how Magnus Carlsen can recover from last round's loss. Looks slightly annoyed, and he did take his jacket off from the beginning. But sponsors, don't worry, the names of his sponsors are also on his shirt. Must be nice, he doesn't have to buy his own clothes, he just gets custom-made sponsor shirts all the time.
How many shirts do you think he has with the sponsor's name on them?
I think he only has one, and Peter Heine has to wash it by hand every night.
That's a difficult task for a second, and we also say that this is a battle between the bottles. Small, tiny little bottle there with Vladimir Kramnik and a huge Norwegian, that's a Norwegian company, isn't it?
Isklar, yeah, that's one of his sponsors.
The sponsor of Magnus Carlsen.
It is pretty good water.
Is it?
Yes. And Magnus Carlsen has decided to employ another Dutch opening. He does have a liking for moving his f-pawn way too early.
We see a close-up of Vladimir Kramnik focusing on the game, and soon we will also have our chessboard, of course, moving the pieces. But in the meantime, we will just see the camera from the playing hall of the two players and see, of course, anything we can learn from their posture, from the way they look at the board, if they are confident, if they are worried. I think Vladimir Kramnik seems to be relaxed and very focused, but maybe Magnus Carlsen is even more focused on the position. He doesn't want to lose yet another game. He has to recover from this loss with the white pieces against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
Yeah, interesting opening choice by Carlsen. He's going for the stone wall, which, if white already has a pawn on d4, is a fairly respectable opening. On this move order, when there is no pawn committed to d4 yet, it has a shady reputation, because white can go for d3 and then try to break up the center with c4 and later e4. So this does not have the best of images, this line. But interesting that Magnus employs it anyway. I'm not a big fan because his pawn on f5 just looks ugly. If you manage to get an e5 and coordinate your pieces, you could be all right, but I've always thought this was a very, very dubious way to play. So Magnus Carlsen pushing the envelope a little bit here, trying to get Vladimir Kramnik into unfamiliar territory. Knight c3, knight c6, e4, typical way to counter in the center. fe4 is fool's gold, just knight g5, winning the pawn back. So Carlsen went e5 and Kramnik decided to develop with bishop to g5. And the problem for black is, if he can't develop any initiative, he's very likely to be stuck with an isolated e-pawn after a potential e takes f5 or fe knight takes e4. So this, yeah, always struck me as unpleasant. I'm curious to see how Carlsen will handle it.
King h8 moving out of the diagonal that he had weakened with f5, but I also prefer white, as you said, Jan. This position seems to be just very comfortable for white, and you don't need miracle moves to play here with the white pieces. Bishop takes f5, of course, black is developing, and he will try to create some kind of attack. If not, this position with the isolated pawn and weaknesses in black's camp can be unpleasant in an endgame. Knight h4, asking the bishop where he wants to go.
Yeah, it's very logical. Freeing his own bishop, I guess bishop e6, he wants to go knight d5. The one problem with the white position is that he has to allow the black knight to jump into d4. But it looks like there's still a lot going for white. You could consider bishop takes f6 here, for example, gf, and queen to h5, moving to the attack, threatening knight g6 check. That is a committal decision because you're giving up your structural edge, but Magnus has to be extremely cautious here. Similar things could be said about knight f6, gf, bishop to h6. I don't see anything better than knight to d4, though. You don't really want to take on d5. Giving up your light square bishop just leads to too many holes after bishop takes d5. So Carlsen has work cut out for him. He should jump into d4 and try to weather the storm, in my opinion. If he manages to do so, your guess is as good as mine. Even f4 here is interesting.
f4, interesting. But yeah, it's also logical that you want to challenge the knight on d4. That's a very annoying piece. This d4 outpost for the knight is perfect. So f4 definitely makes sense. I think he was about to touch the queen. Does he want to play queen e8 or queen d7? Queen d7,
queen d7
on the board.
Yeah. Still, similar things apply. Bishop f6, I'm very curious if this is a good idea or a terrible idea, because It does create some threats, and if you manage to somehow control the light squares, you would be in great shape, but you're running the risk that black, I don't know how you cover it. Let's say rook g8, bishop e4, knight d4. If there's nothing direct and black manages to get his pawns rolling, all of a sudden black could be even better strategically. But here f6 is hanging, so things aren't that easy. However, you have to switch from positional play to direct calculation if you want to do that as white. Tough decision for Vladimir Kramnik.
And maybe that's what he wanted to avoid. He would love to play an endgame, as he said. He would like to exchange many pieces, but here he has to go very direct with bishop takes f6 and queen h5.
He takes
knight
gf, bishop h6. The rook most likely is going to go to g8. But rook g8 is queen f3, which looks a bit unpleasant, targeting this guy.
And if queen f7 or queen...
Yeah.
But knight f5 is coming, so you managed to place the knight there on f5. That's what black should try to avoid somehow.
Yeah, queen f3 doesn't look like it found Kramnik's liking. He just went rook to c1, covering the c4 pawn, also introducing the idea of going c5. The position has become a lot more double-edged, so that's probably what Magnus was looking for. Knight d4, for example, and it can go either way. Once again, the world champion making a slightly dodgy opening look dynamic and interesting.
He's brought his rook to the d5, very logical move, and bishop e3 is on the board, so rook a d8, bishop e3.
Yeah, Kramnik is not going for a direct attack. He's trying to stabilize the position now that Carlsen decided against knight d4. He can control the d4 square. And then later try to cash in on the weaknesses on the king side.
Queen f7 has just been played by Magnus.
Yeah, if you want to go oppositionally, you could think about bishop d5 here. The exchange of light square bishops would be in white's favor, potentially. But you gotta make sure that there's no unpleasant pins along the d-file. No, bishop f8, targeting this guy. Kramnik's played queen a4 instead, didn't like that. Oops, sorry, wrong board. Very tense situation, but I believe that Kramnik has it under control.
Do you think he would want to grab the pawn, because that means that you have to give up this beautiful fianchetto bishop and there are weaknesses on the light squares?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's number one on his priority list, but Carlsen has to worry about all these things like c5 followed by bishop takes c6, or even just reinforcing the position.
Rook g4,
stopping c5.
Magnus is playing very active. That's what he should do, of course.
Yeah, and it's tricky if you want to go b3 or not, because it cuts off the queen from the rest of the army.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to play b3 there. But what else? The pawn is hanging.
You might be able to ignore it, just go rook d1. If, let's say, bishop takes c4, take here, queen takes. Still very double-edged, but I have a feeling white should be alright.
Bishop takes c6, I don't have time for some tricks with bishop e2. Maybe it's not working. I was just trying to find something. Well,
I have my doubts, but yeah, it's a tricky little move.
Maybe it's not working, I was just wondering. But anyway, Vladimir played differently. He went knight d2, protecting the pawn, but did he miss something? What happened there?
He gave the pawn, he went knight to f3, decided it was a priority to bring this knight back into action, but I'm not quite sure what he's up to after rook takes c4. Is this the blunder problem we talked about?
Might be, isn't this just a pawn down?
Yeah, he still has a good structure, but
pawns
Carlsen just
down?
keeps grabbing all his pawns. And
Queen b5, but Magnus Carlsen is 2 pawns up for the moment.
if knight g5.
Yeah, that's a nice trick, winning the bishop on d5. Well, it's an exchange, but destroying black's pawn structure.
Yeah, but now it looks good for black. I don't know, queen b3 could be moved, for example, queen d5.
Yeah, any move, it doesn't seem to be so dangerous. The only threat is queen takes b7, and it does seem like queen b3, as you said, could be a very good move meeting this threat. Knight a5, is that?
Knight b4, I would guess.
I was like, it's impossible that knight a5 happened, but I didn't see the camera well. Knight b4, of course, makes a lot more sense, not blundering the knight. Queen takes b7, we are expecting. And his idea is that he will go, no, the pawn is not taken. Kramnik has placed something else. He seems to be very nervous.
No more reason to be nervous. He's just 2 pawns down, and he can only win from here because the position is already lost. Yeah, something's gone very, very wrong there for Vladimir Kramnik.
What's going on? What have they played?
Rook d1, c6 is on the board. Carlsen stabilizes. Kramnik is trying to launch a bit of a desperate attack, but he lost too much time here, and the sole f5 square is not gonna
2 pawns up for Magnus Carlsen. He should be able to win this easily, unless he blunders as well.
Now black is fully coordinated now. The bishop can go back to f8. This should not cause the world champion any particular problems. Bishop f8 is on the board. Yeah, Carlsen keeps making it look easy, but playing this opening, getting away with it against Vladimir Kramnik, kudos to him.
At the same time, is it possible that the person who has just beaten Magnus Carlsen, Maxim Vachilegrad, is losing to Vishy Anand?
I'm sure it's possible. We're gonna check out their game once we're done with Magnus Carlsen, who's still
finished already, so we will soon see the result. What happened in the Vishy Anand game?
Yeah, Maxim Vachilegrad lost. Vishy Anand keeps playing great chess and is probably still 2 points behind Magnus Carlsen, because it does look like Magnus should convert here. However, it's blitz. There's still a grip on the white squares, so it ain't over till it's over. King h1, Kramnik is trying desperately to make something happen, but he just doesn't have enough pieces to start an attack. I don't know, maybe once g4, rook g1, rook g3.
This is the position he wanted to have before, but with the 2 more pawns on the board. A beautiful knight on f5, queen on e4, having the grip on the light squares, but 2 pawns are missing, so that's not ideal.
What do you do? Rook d8?
Yeah, I think so. Rook d8 and g4.
Yeah, that's logical. Not sure I understand rook d8, sort of self-pinning, but black can take some liberties.
Yeah, we're playing very fast. We will need to see the camera for the moves. Or
well, Magnus' plan is to challenge along the d file. That's why we went rook d8, rook d7, then covered it with queen f7. Now he can start exchange operations on the d file. The rooks have disappeared from the board, and
everything is being exchanged, and of course
helps black.
Once he exchanges queens too, this is just an endgame with 2 pawns up. Queen e4. If Vladimir doesn't want to exchange queens, which of course is logical, he might get mated. Yeah, no queens on the board. They exchange in a funny way with f3, knight f4, knight takes e2 check, and everything's happening very quickly, but this doesn't seem to be a difficult endgame to win.
Not sure. He had to give 1 pawn back, but this bishop should be strong enough to support the 3 versus 1 on the queen side, even though the knight on, what's going on here? The board keeps jumping around. The knight on f5 looks very powerful. It is still a short range piece, and it's going to have a hard time influencing the action on the queen side. Therefore, yeah, Magnus should convert this without particular trouble.
Has he missed something because he was shaking his head?
I'm not sure.
Or is just winning anyway?
Maybe he thought he was getting mated with knight e5, but the king still has plenty of squares.
Knight f3, heading to d2,
Bishop
but
b4 is covering the d2
very
square.
good move, and Vladimir Kramnik didn't realize that the pawn was being promoted b2, and he cannot stop it. So Magnus Carlsen fights back and finishes with that. How many points will mean that? 15 out of 23. That means for Magnus Carlsen. But let's just talk about the standings after this game, because Nakamura is still fighting in this rook endgame. Oh, we love rook endgames. Every second game is a rook endgame.
Yeah, Wesley So continues a strong play, even against the well-known blitz expert Hikaru Nakamura. Only Wesley So can win this position. Rook b8, rook takes g3. Does look to me like black should be in time to... Oh, hang on. Just as I said, it should be a draw. I'm having second thoughts, because rook b5, this is a very nice move. The point is, if something like this happens... the board is just too fast for me to show anything.
Yeah, let's talk about the camera view.
My point is, if you get such a position with the king cut off, white is winning, because after h2 you can go rook b1 followed by rook h1, rook takes h2. Ah, you can't actually see what I'm showing. Okay.
He goes back with the rook to cut the king, but this will lead to a draw. So after rook c5, well, tricky move because you cannot push the h pawn. That would mean that he can win it with rook c3, king b7. Now another check. We'll go back. No, king b8.
This might be winning for white. Very, very nicely done by Wesley. Built a bridge there and
Wesley
is winning the game.
Won a very nice rook endgame against Hikaru Nakamura, who is shaking his head. He still cannot believe that he lost this position.
And this is the construction I was trying to show earlier after.
I think we still don't have the board. Now there it is.
If you ever get an endgame like this with the king cut off along the 5th rank, there is nothing that black can do, because whenever he tries h2, the rook isn't time to pick up the pawn, and therefore we can see Wesley cleverly put his rook along the 5th rank and won that game. Nice technique.
Very well played by Vasily. So Anish Giri is still fighting against Levon Aronyan. What is the position? This is the actual position that they are playing. Seems rook on the 7th rank.
Yeah, this is a draw. Levon looks half asleep, and let's hope for his sake that he can draw this in his sleep. King e5, rook h4, king f6. It's a theoretical draw, but you still got to make some precise moves. Rook to a4. Anish repeats the position once. Now he's going to try rook g7, rook g6. No, he goes king g6, rook a6, and this is...
The position, draw agreed. That means that round 5 of the Blitz is over, and we will have a look at the results and the standings.